Emma Carter stared at her reflection in the courthouse bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman in front of her. At 32, she had everything: an impressive career as a senior partner in one of New York's top law firms, a beautiful brownstone in the Upper East Side, and, until today, what she thought was the perfect marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her. As a corporate lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions, she had orchestrated countless deals, yet she had failed to see the collapse of her own marriage. The fluorescent lighting highlighted the dark circles under her eyes, remnants of sleepless nights ever since she discovered the truth 3 months ago. The memory replayed in her mind like a nightmare, walking into her best friend Olivia's apartment unannounced, bringing soup and medicine, only to find Olivia in bed, with Ethan, Emma's husband of 8 years. She had felt the world around her shatter. Ethan had tried to explain, Olivia had cried, but all Emma had heard was the sound of her own heart breaking. Now, standing in the courtroom just an hour ago, she had watched Ethan sit across from her, wearing the same navy blue Tom Ford suit she had bought him for their last anniversary. The audacity. In the matter of Carter versus Carter, the court grants the petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, Judge Harrison had announced, his gavel striking down with finality. Relief should have come. But all Emma felt was emptiness. As the late afternoon sun filtered through the courthouse windows, Emma pulled her Burberry scarf tighter around her neck, a gift from Ethan, one of the last remnants of a life she no longer belonged to. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way down the courthouse steps, ignoring the sympathetic glances from colleagues who had once admired her meteoric rise in the legal world. Now, they were witnesses to her personal downfall. Normally, she would head straight to the office, bury herself in work until the cleaning staff reminded her it was past midnight. But today, the thought of returning to her office, with its cold glass walls and memories of Ethan's visits, made her stomach turn. Instead, she turned left, toward a bar she knew well, the Belmont. A dimly lit, discreet place where Wall Street executives sealed deals and lawyers drank away the stress of the day. Just one drink, she told herself, knowing it was a lie. As she pushed open the heavy wooden doors, the warm glow of the chandeliers wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. The bartender, an older man with kind eyes, looked up from polishing a glass. "Rough day?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Emma slid onto the leather barstool, placing her designer handbag beside her. "You could say that," she muttered. "Bourbon. Neat. Make it a double." The first sip burned her throat. The second sip dulled the pain. The third made her forget why she was even drinking in the first place. Consciousness returned in waves, each one bringing a new sensation of discomfort. First, the relentless pounding in her head, as if a jackhammer was drilling into her skull. Then, the dry, cotton-like texture of her mouth. Finally, the nauseating realization that she had no idea where she was. Emma forced her eyes open, immediately regretting it as bright sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a penthouse that screamed luxury. This wasn't her bedroom. This wasn't even a hotel room. This was something else entirely. She pushed herself upright, groaning as the silk sheets pooled around her. A king-sized bed, dressed in what felt like thousand-thread-count Egyptian cotton, surrounded her. The scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. Across the room, her black dress from the night before lay draped over the back of a sleek leather chaise lounge. Her shoes had been placed neatly beside it. She exhaled shakily. "Okay, think, Emma. How did you get here?" Flashes of memory returned, sitting at the bar, drowning herself in bourbon, the warmth of a stranger sitting beside her. A deep voice. Sharp gray eyes. A conversation about corporate law that, even in her drunken haze, she had delivered with fire and passion. Then, nothing. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, finding it plugged into a charging dock beside the bed. 9:47 a.m. 17 missed calls, most of them from her assistant. No messages from Ethan, not that she wanted any. Then, a sound. A deep, masculine voice called from beyond the bedroom door. "Good morning." Emma's pulse spiked. She grabbed the sheet and wrapped it around herself as footsteps approached. The door opened, and there he stood. A man in his late 30s, tall with an athletic build, wearing a fitted black cashmere sweater and tailored pants that looked absurdly expensive. His dark hair was neatly styled, touched with silver at the temples. His chiseled features belonged on the cover of Forbes, not in the middle of whatever mess she had created for herself. And then there were his eyes, piercing gray, intelligent, and assessing her with amusement. He held 2 mugs of coffee and extended one toward her. "You look like you could use this." Emma swallowed hard. "Who are you?" A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Alexander Reid." Her mind clicked into place. Alexander Reid. The billionaire CEO of Reid Technologies, the AI-driven firm revolutionizing medical diagnostics. A man whose face appeared in business magazines almost as often as in society columns, though his personal life remained largely a mystery. Her stomach twisted. "I woke up in Alexander Reid's penthouse." "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He took a slow sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of his cup before answering. "Because you needed help last night. And I was in a position to offer it." Emma's breath hitched as fragments of the previous night resurfaced, her credit card declining when she tried to book a car, the bartender gently telling her she'd had enough. And then, Alexander. He had been there, listening as she drunkenly deconstructed the failures of modern marriage. She closed her eyes in mortification. "Oh God, please tell me I didn't." "You did," he confirmed, a hint of amusement in his tone. "You gave what was possibly the most impressive drunk lecture on corporate law I've ever heard." Followed by a scathing critique of monogamy as a failed institution. Emma groaned, burying her face in her hands. "Kill me now." Alexander chuckled, moving to sit on the chaise lounge. It was actually quite entertaining. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze cautiously. "So, what exactly happened after that? You nearly fell trying to leave. I couldn't let you wander off alone in that state." He leaned back, stretching one arm over the back of the chair. "My driver brought us here. My housekeeper helped you get settled in the guest room. I stayed upstairs." Emma exhaled, a strange mix of relief and confusion settling over her. "That was unexpectedly decent of you." Alexander smirked. "Don't sound so surprised. Some of us billionaires try to be decent human beings." She studied him over the rim of her coffee mug. "And what do you get out of this, Mr. Reid?" His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "A conversation. A proposal, actually." Her eyebrows lifted. "A proposal? You said last night that you were one of the top corporate lawyers in the city," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I happen to need someone with your expertise for my company's foundation. We're expanding our legal team, particularly in handling ethical compliance and corporate accountability." Emma frowned, caught off guard. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you an opportunity," he corrected. "A chance to work for something bigger than just another law firm. You said yourself last night, people in power always find a way to manipulate the system. You know that better than anyone now." His words hit deeper than she expected. Emma looked down at her coffee, her mind drifting back to the moment she realized her marriage was a lie. The way Ethan had lied so easily. The way Olivia had betrayed her without hesitation. She had spent years believing in rules, in contracts, in the idea that law could create fairness. But now, she knew better. She met Alexander's gaze again. "And why would I trust you?" His lips quirked into a small, knowing smile. "Because I'm not asking for your trust." He set his coffee down and leaned forward slightly. "I'm asking for your expertise. And I think you're smart enough to see the difference." A tense silence stretched between them. Emma considered the weight of his words. A week ago, she thought she knew exactly where her life was headed. Now, she was sitting in the penthouse of a billionaire who had, for some reason, decided to offer her a path she hadn't even considered. Maybe it was reckless. Maybe it was insane. But maybe, it was exactly what she needed. She exhaled slowly and nodded. "Tell me more." Emma sat in stunned silence as Alexander outlined the details of his offer. The Reid Foundation, the philanthropic branch of his empire, was expanding its legal department. They needed someone who not only understood corporate law but also had first-hand experience with how power and deception could shatter lives. "You want me to lead the foundation's legal team?" she asked, still struggling to process everything. Alexander nodded, sipping his coffee. "I want someone who isn't afraid to challenge authority. Someone who knows what it's like to be blindsided by people they trusted." He tilted his head slightly. "You fit that description better than anyone." Emma let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "So, what? I get drunk in a bar, rant about my life falling apart, and suddenly I'm qualified to run legal affairs for a billionaire's foundation?" "Not just any foundation," he corrected, his gray eyes unwavering. "We're launching a new initiative focused on helping individuals rebuild after personal and financial devastation, divorces, corporate betrayals, wrongful terminations. People who lost everything and need a second chance. People like you." His words hit her harder than she expected. The idea of using her expertise to actually help people, rather than just fighting endless battles for the wealthy elite, was tempting. Too tempting. Emma forced herself to look away, focusing instead on the city skyline beyond the massive windows. "I don't know, Alexander. This sounds like a convenient excuse for you to hire someone you found crying into her bourbon last night." He smirked. "If that were the case, I would have left you to your own devices and never brought it up again. But you impressed me, Emma. Even drunk, you were sharper than half the legal minds I've worked with. That says something." She turned back to him, narrowing her eyes. "And what exactly does it say?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That you're not as broken as you think you are." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Because deep down, she knew that's exactly what she had been feeling, broken. Destroyed by Ethan's betrayal. Humiliated by Olivia's deception. Cast aside like she was nothing. And yet, sitting here, wrapped in an expensive silk robe in a billionaire's penthouse, she felt something she hadn't in months. Hope. She took a deep breath. "Let's say I consider this. What's the catch?" "No catch," Alexander replied smoothly. "You'll have full autonomy over the legal team, and your salary will be more than comfortable." He paused. "But you will be in the spotlight. Working with me means public scrutiny. People will talk, they'll assume things. Can you handle that?" Emma hesitated. She had spent years meticulously crafting her reputation in the legal world, ensuring that her success was based on merit alone. The last thing she needed was whispers about how she landed a billionaire after her divorce. "I don't sleep my way into opportunities," she said coldly. Alexander didn't flinch. "Good. Because I don't hand them out for that reason." His expression softened. "But I do recognize talent. And if you take this job, it will be because you earned it. A long silence stretched between them. Emma tapped her fingers against the ceramic mug, contemplating. The logical part of her mind screamed at her to decline, to retreat back into the world she knew, corporate law, cold case files, and impersonal victories in courtrooms. But another part, the part that had been crushed under Ethan's betrayal, whispered that this could be a new beginning. A chance to rewrite her story. She met Alexander's gaze, her decision made. "All right," she said finally. "I'll take the job." A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Good. Welcome to the Reid Foundation, Ms. Carter." She couldn't help but smirk back. "Don't make me regret this, Mr. Reid." His expression turned almost amused. "I wouldn't dream of it." As Emma took another sip of coffee, she knew one thing for certain: her life was about to change in ways she never could have predicted. Emma spent the next 2 weeks adjusting to her new reality. Her mornings were no longer filled with dread about running into Ethan at their old law firm. Instead, she walked into the sleek, glass-walled offices of the Reid Foundation, where every day brought a new challenge, a new reason to push herself beyond the confines of her past. Her office overlooked the city, a sprawling view of New York that reminded her she was no longer trapped in a life she didn't want. The work was unlike anything she had done before, drafting policies that would provide legal support for individuals who had been financially ruined by divorce, corporate corruption, or business betrayals. It was meaningful. It was exhausting. And, if she was being honest, it was exhilarating. And then came the headlines. Emma hadn't given much thought to what working for Alexander Reid would mean outside of the office, until the first article appeared. Billionaire CEO's new mystery woman, who is Emma Carter? Then another. From divorce court to boardroom, the sudden rise of Emma Carter. And the worst one yet. Sleeping her way to the top. The shocking connection between Emma Carter and Alexander Reid. Her phone buzzed non-stop that morning, colleagues from her old firm, friends she hadn't spoken to in years, even her mother, who, despite her usual indifference to gossip, left a very pointed voicemail. "Emma, dear, I know you're a grown woman, but these articles. Are they true? Are you seeing this man?" She wanted to scream. Alexander must have seen the headlines too, because just before noon, he knocked once on her office door before stepping inside. "You look like you're plotting someone's murder," he said, dropping a newspaper on her desk. The cover featured a blurry, candid shot of them leaving a coffee shop, both mid-laugh. Emma glared at it. "I suppose I should be grateful they caught my good side." Alexander smirked. "They make it sound much more scandalous than it actually is." She let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, so you didn't secretly seduce me into taking this job?" He leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "If I recall, you took the job after telling me you don't sleep your way into opportunities." He tilted his head. "Or has that changed?" Emma shot him a glare. "Very funny." But deep down, the whispers in those articles stung. She had worked too hard, spent years proving herself, clawing her way up in a male-dominated field, just for people to assume that she landed this position because of a man. "I can release a statement," Alexander said, his voice softer now. "Make it clear that your hiring had nothing to do with our unusual first meeting." Emma exhaled. "No. That will just make it worse. If we deny it, people will assume it's true. If we ignore it, they'll move on." She hesitated before adding, "At least, I hope they will." Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We let them talk." She blinked. "That's it?" His smirk returned. "Emma, I've been in this position before. The press loves a scandal, but they love a new scandal even more. We just have to outlast their attention span. Emma wasn't convinced, but she appreciated his confidence. Just as she was about to change the subject, her office door flew open, and to her absolute horror, Ethan stormed in. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving his phone in her direction. Emma didn't even flinch. "Ethan, this is my office. You don't work here. Get out." He ignored her. "Are you sleeping with him?" His gaze darted to Alexander, filled with jealousy and anger. "Is that how you got this job?" Alexander didn't move, didn't even blink, but there was an unmistakable edge to his posture, controlled, powerful. Emma, on the other hand, felt something snap inside her. "You lost the right to ask me anything about my life the second you decided to sleep with Olivia," she said coldly. "Now, get out of my office before I have security remove you." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You really think this is a good look for you, Emma? People are already talking. You're proving them right." Emma forced herself to breathe through the rage bubbling in her chest. Alexander, still unnervingly calm, finally spoke. "Mr. Carter, I'd suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself any further." Ethan turned to him, fists clenched. "And who the hell do you think you are?" Alexander smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The man who hired your ex-wife because she's a damn good lawyer. And the man who will have you escorted out of this building in the next 60 seconds if you don't walk out on your own." Silence. Ethan looked at Emma one last time, his expression unreadable, then turned on his heel and stormed out. Emma released the breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Well," Alexander said, still casually leaning against her desk. "That was dramatic." Emma groaned, rubbing her temples. "I hate that he still thinks he has any control over my life." Alexander nodded. "He's losing control, and he knows it. That's why he came here." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had, in such a short time, become an unexpected source of stability. "Thank you," she said quietly. Alexander shrugged. "For what? Threatening your ex-husband? That was just for fun." Emma rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at her lips. The headlines would continue, the whispers would persist, and Ethan wasn't done causing trouble. But in that moment, Emma felt something unfamiliar. Powerful. Unshaken. For the first time in months, she wasn't reacting to the chaos around her, she was standing in the center of it, in control. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her again. Emma sat in her office long after Ethan had left, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The confrontation had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just about him, it was about the way people perceived her, about the way the world always seemed to assume that a woman couldn't succeed without some ulterior motive, without a powerful man pulling the strings. She had worked too damn hard to let anyone, especially Ethan, reduce her achievements to a scandalous headline. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, already knowing who it was. Alexander stepped inside, his usual effortless confidence in place, but there was something softer in his expression now. "I wanted to check on you," he said simply. Emma exhaled, rubbing her temples. "I'm fine." He gave her a look, one that said he didn't believe a word of it, but, to his credit, he didn't push. Instead, he walked over to the large window and gazed out at the city. "You know," he mused, "when I first started Reid Technologies, the board tried to push me out within the first year. Said I was too young, too reckless, too unproven." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you proved them wrong." His lips twitched. "Eventually. But for a while I let their doubts get to me. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I really did just get lucky, if maybe I wasn't as capable as I thought." He turned to her. Sound familiar? Emma hated how well he could read her. She sighed. The logical part of me knows that I earned my place here. The other part, she gestured vaguely at the tabloid sitting on her desk, the headline practically mocking her. Alexander walked over, picked up the newspaper, and with zero hesitation, ripped it in half. Emma blinked. Well. That's one way to handle bad press. He smirked. Emma, the only way they win is if you start believing their bullshit. The only way Ethan wins is if you let his words make you doubt yourself. She wanted to believe him. She really did. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what she did, no matter how much she accomplished, there would always be whispers, always be someone trying to undermine her. As if reading her mind, Alexander leaned forward, bracing his hands on her desk. You know what the real power move is? Emma tilted her head. Enlighten me. He smiled. You prove them right. She frowned. Come again. You let them think what they want. Let them believe you only got here because of me. His voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. And then, you become so damn successful, so irreplaceable, that they have no choice but to eat their words. A slow smile spread across her lips. I like the way you think, Mr. Reid. Alexander winked. I try. Emma leaned back in her chair, something settling in her chest. She had been letting this nonsense consume her, letting it make her feel small. But Alexander was right. If people were going to doubt her anyway, she might as well give them a reason to talk. And she knew exactly where to start. Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into her work with laser focus. If she was going to silence the doubters, she would do it in the most public, undeniable way possible. She revamped the legal department at the Reid Foundation, identifying loopholes in policies that had been overlooked for years. She built a new initiative that provided financial and legal aid to individuals who had been unfairly stripped of assets during divorces, a move that immediately caught media attention. Within a month, industry publications weren't writing about her alleged romance with Alexander Reid. They were writing about her work. Emma Carter reshapes corporate philanthropy, inside her groundbreaking legal initiative. From divorce scandal to power player, how Emma Carter is changing the game. The shift in narrative was subtle but powerful. Ethan, of course, didn't take it well. She had expected another confrontation, another attempt to rattle her. Instead, he took the coward's route, trying to undermine her professionally. He reached out to old colleagues, feeding them lies. He tried to get insiders at the foundation to question her leadership. He even attempted to have an anonymous source leak false accusations about her competence. Unfortunately for him, Emma had been playing this game a lot longer than he had. She anticipated his every move, shutting down his attempts before they gained traction. She was 3 steps ahead of him at every turn, and when he finally realized he couldn't shake her, he went quiet. Not long after, she received a text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake, Emma. He's not who you think he is. E. She stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Whatever game Ethan was playing, she wasn't interested. She had a job to do. Chapter 8, The Line Between Business and Something More. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Emma found herself still at her desk, poring over a particularly complex case file. A knock at the door made her glance up. Alexander stood there, looking impossibly put together for this late at night. He held up a takeout bag. Figured you hadn't eaten. She arched an eyebrow. Are you psychic now? He smirked. Just observant. She waved him in, and he set the food down before taking a seat across from her. For a while, They ate in comfortable silence, the hum of the city below the only sound between them. Eventually, Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You've done good work here, Emma." She smiled. "That almost sounds like a compliment." He chuckled. "It is." A beat passed before he added, "I meant what I said before. You're not as broken as you think you are." Emma met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time since she had stepped into this office, she allowed herself to wonder what it would be like, to let her guard down. To let someone in. And that terrified her. Because Alexander Reid wasn't just another man. He wasn't just another boss. He was the first person who had ever looked at her and seen potential instead of damage. And that made him dangerous. She cleared her throat, pushing back her chair. "I should finish reviewing this case." Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But don't work too late." As he stood and left, Emma exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temples. This was getting complicated. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. The next few weeks passed in a blur of long hours, high-stakes meetings, and an increasing awareness that the dynamic between Emma and Alexander was shifting. They worked late into the night more often than not, sometimes in his office, sometimes in hers. At first, it was all business, strategizing, negotiating, untangling the legal knots of their latest initiatives. But then, there were moments. Moments where his hand lingered just a little too long when passing her a file. Moments where she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Moments where the space between them felt charged with something unspoken, something dangerous. Emma tried to ignore it. She reminded herself that this was work. That he was her boss. That she had just clawed her way back from the lowest point in her life, and the last thing she needed was another entanglement with a powerful man. And yet, one evening, well past midnight, she found herself sitting on the floor of Alexander's office, surrounded by scattered documents, laughing harder than she had in months. "You're telling me," she gasped between laughs, "that you once hacked into your college's grading system just to prove a point?" Alexander smirked, leaning back against the couch. "They told me it was unhackable. I took that personally." Emma shook her head, still grinning. "And what did you do with that power?" He sighed dramatically. "I fixed a single incorrect grade on my transcript. Then I left a note in the system that said, 'Nice try.'" She snorted. "You're insufferable." "I prefer, highly motivated," he corrected smoothly. Their laughter faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should have. Emma became acutely aware of how close they were, her knee brushing against his, the warmth of his presence beside her. She swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to do with the way he was looking at her. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice lower than before. "Can I ask you something?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Why did you really take this job?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I thought we already established that I'm an exceptional lawyer," she joked, trying to lighten the mood. Alexander didn't smile. "You are. But that's not the whole reason." Emma exhaled, looking down at the document in her hands, though she wasn't really reading it. "I guess I needed to prove to myself that I could start over." She glanced up at him. "That I wasn't just some woman who got chewed up and spit out by a bad marriage." He nodded, as if he understood that better than most. "And have you?" She wasn't sure if he was asking if she had proven it to herself, or to him. Emma held his gaze. "Not yet. But I'm getting there." For a moment, she thought he might say something else, something that would push them past the point of no return. But then, he leaned back, breaking the tension. "Good," he said simply. And just like that, the moment passed. The next morning, Emma walked into the office feeling more in control than she had in weeks. But that feeling didn't last long. As soon as she stepped into her office, her assistant, Claire, looked up from her desk, her face pale. "Emma," she said urgently. "You need to see this." She handed Emma a printed email, an encrypted message sent from an anonymous source. As Emma's eyes scanned the contents, her blood ran cold. Internal financial records. Board meeting minutes. A carefully orchestrated plan to push Alexander out of his own company. Her stomach turned. Someone on the board was planning a coup. A sharp knock on the door pulled her attention away. "Miss Carter," her assistant said nervously, "Mr. Whitmore from the board is here to see you." Emma's grip tightened on the papers. Robert Whitmore, head of the board's finance committee. A man who had never liked the way Alexander ran things, always claiming the foundation was a waste of company resources. Her mind raced. "They're testing me. They want to see if I'll stay silent." She forced a neutral expression and nodded. "Send him in." Robert Whitmore strolled into her office with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. He settled into the chair across from her, adjusting his Rolex. "Emma," he said smoothly, "I'll get straight to the point. The board has been impressed with your work. We're considering creating a new position, Chief Legal Officer for the entire Reid Technologies Group." Emma raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an offer." He nodded. "It would be a defining role for your career. Unprecedented authority. The kind of position that secures a legacy." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "And what would I have to do to get it?" Whitmore's smile was slow and deliberate. "Stay out of the board's affairs." Her stomach twisted. So this was it. A bribe wrapped in a promotion. She took a measured breath. "And by board's affairs, I assume you mean your plan to remove Alexander." Whitmore's smile didn't falter. "Alexander is a visionary, but he's too idealistic. His focus on philanthropy is bleeding the company's profits. Investors are nervous. This is just business, Emma. Surely you understand that." Emma thought about the man who had taken a chance on her when she was at her lowest. The man who had told her to prove them right by succeeding on her own terms. She set the papers down on her desk, keeping her expression cool. "I'll think about it." Whitmore nodded as if he had already won. "Good. The board meets in 2 days. I trust you'll make the right decision." As soon as the door shut behind him, Emma exhaled shakily. She glanced down at the documents again, her mind racing. She had a choice to make. Protect her career, or protect the man who had given her a second chance. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure which decision would cost her more. Emma sat alone in her office, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The papers in front of her felt heavier than they should have, as if they held not just information, but fate itself. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alexander. "Dinner tonight? I miss you." She closed her eyes, her chest tightening. The casualness of his words felt almost cruel, considering what she had just learned. She wanted to believe he would be fine. That Alexander was too smart, too powerful to be taken down by a group of boardroom sharks. But the documents in front of her told a different story. They weren't just planning to push him out. They were dismantling him, piece by piece. Cutting him off from financial access, painting him as reckless and irresponsible in front of shareholders, shifting company funds into private accounts he would have no control over. By the time they were done, he wouldn't just be removed, he'd be ruined. And Whitmore was offering her an out. Play along, stay silent, and she would walk away with everything she had ever worked for. The highest position she'd ever been offered. The respect and power she had fought to reclaim after her divorce. But at what cost? She had spent so much of her life choosing security over risk. Choosing logic over heart. And where had that gotten her? Married to a liar. Trapped in a cycle of doubt. Emma inhaled sharply, steeling herself. Not this time. She found Alexander in his penthouse office, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out over the city. He turned when she entered, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're early." Emma closed the door behind her, gripping the papers in her hand. "I need to talk to you." His expression shifted, sensing the change in her tone. He straightened. "What's wrong?" She crossed the room, setting the documents down on his desk. This is what's wrong." Alexander picked up the papers, his brow furrowing as he skimmed the contents. His jaw clenched. "Where did you get these?" "They were sent to me anonymously." She hesitated before adding, "And then Whitmore came to my office. He offered me the position of chief legal officer, under one condition." Alexander exhaled through his nose, already knowing the answer. "Loyalty to the board." Emma nodded. "They're planning to vote you out, Alex. This isn't just a warning, they're already in motion. They have everything lined up. If we don't stop them now, it'll be too late." He didn't say anything at first, just stared down at the papers in his hand. When he finally looked at her, something in his eyes had changed. A flash of something darker. Something wounded. "Did you consider taking it?" he asked quietly. Emma's stomach twisted. "What?" "The position. Did you consider it?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. She swallowed hard, knowing that no matter how she answered, something between them was about to shift. "I thought about it," she admitted. "But I didn't even hesitate when I made my decision." He watched her carefully, measuring her words. "And what decision was that?" Emma reached forward, picked up the job offer Whitmore had given her, and tore it in half. She let the pieces flutter onto his desk. "The only one that mattered," she said simply. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then, slowly, his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close. "You really are something else, Emma Carter." Relief flooded her chest, but it was short-lived. "Now," she said, stepping back. "Tell me how we're going to take them down." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of strategy sessions, legal maneuvering, and gathering every piece of evidence they could to counter the board's attack. Emma and Alexander worked side by side, their usual flirtation replaced by laser focus. The stakes were too high for distractions. She compiled a timeline of the board's manipulation, connecting dots that no one had noticed before. She found discrepancies in financial reports that Whitmore and his allies had tried to hide. She crafted airtight legal arguments that made it nearly impossible for them to justify their actions. Alexander, for his part, pulled every connection he had. He met with key investors, reminded them of why they had trusted him in the first place. He played the long game, planting doubt about Whitmore's leadership, making people question whether removing him was truly in their best interest. By the time the shareholders' meeting arrived, they were ready. The boardroom was packed. Reporters lingered just outside, sensing the tension in the air. Investors, executives, and legal advisors filled the long table, murmuring among themselves. Whitmore sat at the head, smug, already assuming victory. Emma sat beside Alexander, her expression unreadable. The meeting began with formalities, but it wasn't long before Whitmore made his move. "I'd like to propose a motion," he said smoothly, standing. "Effective immediately, Alexander Reid will step down as CEO of Reid Technologies." Murmurs rippled through the room. Alexander remained calm, fingers laced together on the table. And on what grounds? Whitmore smiled. Reckless financial decisions. A lack of prioritization of company profits. We have the numbers to prove that Reid Technologies has been losing significant revenue under your leadership. Emma leaned forward. Funny. I have numbers too. She pulled out a stack of files, sliding them across the table. These documents show that certain board members, yourself included, have been funneling company funds into private accounts, disguising them as operational costs. In reality, you've been bleeding this company dry while blaming Alex for your failures. Whitmore's smirk faltered. That's ridiculous. Is it? Emma arched a brow. Because I also have emails. Ones that detail exactly how you plan to stage this coup. She handed out copies. The room fell silent as people scanned the pages. Then, one of the investors, one who had been leaning toward Whitmore, spoke up. Is this true? Whitmore stammered. This is taken out of context. Another board member cut in. This is fraud, Robert. Panic flickered across Whitmore's face. Alexander leaned back, finally speaking. You were right about one thing, Whitmore. This is business. And in business, people like you eventually get caught. The vote that followed was swift. Whitmore and his allies were removed. Criminal investigations were launched. Alexander remained CEO. And Emma? She didn't just win. She made damn sure that everyone in that room knew exactly who she was. Not someone's ex-wife. Not a scandal. Not a woman who needed a man's help to succeed. She was Emma Carter. And she had just changed everything. Chapter 15, After the Storm. The boardroom was still buzzing with tension long after the vote had been cast. Whitmore and his allies were escorted out, their shocked expressions permanently etched in Emma's memory. The reporters outside had already caught wind of what happened, and within hours, headlines across every major business publication would declare Alexander Reid's victory. Emma should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt exhausted. She lingered behind as the room emptied, watching as Alexander exchanged firm handshakes with investors and executives, solidifying his reclaimed position. He had won. They had won. But at what cost? Emma picked up her files and turned to leave when Alexander's voice stopped her. You're just going to walk out? She hesitated before glancing over her shoulder. He was watching her, that unreadable expression back in place, the same one he'd had when he asked if she had considered Whitmore's offer. Emma sighed. I did what I came here to do. You don't need me anymore. A muscle in his jaw twitched. You think this was just about winning? She didn't answer. Because, for her, it had been. She had spent years being underestimated, being defined by her relationship with Ethan, being cast as either the devoted wife or the scorned ex. Taking down Whitmore wasn't just about saving Alexander, it had been about proving to herself that she could still fight. That she could still matter on her own terms. And now that she had, she wasn't sure what was left. I don't want you to go, Alexander admitted, stepping closer. Not just because of the company. Not just because of this fight. Emma closed her eyes briefly, willing herself to stay rational. Alex, she exhaled. This was never meant to be permanent. He frowned. You don't believe that? Didn't she? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. A name she hadn't expected to see. An offer from another firm. She felt her stomach twist. A major corporate law firm wanted to meet with her, one she had once dreamed of working for before her marriage had derailed everything. It was everything she had once wanted. A clean slate. A new future. Alexander must have caught the change in her expression. "What is it?" She hesitated before answering. "A job offer." His jaw tightened. "You're considering it?" "I don't know yet," she admitted honestly. Silence stretched between them. She wanted to stay. She wanted to see what this could be. But at the same time, she had just spent months proving that she didn't need another powerful man to define her. Staying with Alexander, even if it was for the right reasons, felt dangerously close to repeating old patterns. "I need to figure out who I am without all of this," she finally said, gesturing to the empty boardroom, to the company, to everything that had consumed her life since she had walked into that bar months ago. Alexander's expression was unreadable again, but this time, she could sense the frustration beneath it. "So that's it?" he asked. "You fight beside me, we win, and you just walk away." Emma's chest ached. "It's not that simple. Isn't it?" His voice was quieter now. "Or are you just scared?" She flinched at the accuracy of his words. Maybe she was. Maybe she was terrified that if she stayed, she would lose herself in him. That she would wake up one day and realize she had built her life around a man again, even if that man wasn't Ethan. She took a deep breath and forced herself to say what she knew was true. "I can't be yours if I don't even know who I am yet." His expression softened, but the hurt was still there. "And what if you figure it out and realize you want this?" Emma smiled sadly. "Then I hope you'll still be here." Emma left Reid Technologies that night without a grand farewell. She didn't linger in the office, didn't stop to reminisce. She simply walked out into the New York night and kept moving. In the weeks that followed, she accepted the job offer, but on her terms. No more working under someone else's shadow. She negotiated a leadership role, one where she would have full control over the legal division. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She moved into a new apartment, one that was entirely hers, not something shared, not something borrowed. She furnished it with pieces she chose, small tokens of her new life. She still saw Alexander, but less frequently. He had given her space, just as she had asked. There were text messages, late-night phone calls where they talked about business, about life, about nothing and everything. But he never pushed. And neither did she. One evening, months later, she sat at a cafe with a glass of wine, reviewing a contract. A shadow fell over her table, and when she looked up, she wasn't surprised to see him standing there. "Emma," Alexander greeted, his smirk familiar and warm. "Alexander," she replied smoothly. "What brings you here?" He slid into the seat across from her. "I was in the neighborhood." She arched a brow. "Were you?" He shrugged. "Maybe." A pause. "Maybe I was just curious." "About?" He leaned forward slightly. "About whether you've figured it out yet." Emma felt her heart race, not with fear, but with something steadier. Something real. She set her pen down, meeting his gaze. "I think I'm getting there." Alexander studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good." He didn't push. He didn't ask for more than she was ready to give. And for the first time in a long time, Emma realized that maybe this wasn't about endings or beginnings. Maybe this was about the space in between. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The air between them felt charged, yet unhurried. Unlike before, when everything in Emma's life had been a storm of choices made out of desperation or survival, this moment was steady. Measured. She swirled her wine in its glass, watching Alexander with the same scrutiny he often reserved for billion-dollar deals. He looked different than the man she had met that night in the bar, less invincible, more human. And maybe she looked different too. Still running an empire, she asked, half teasing, half curious. Alexander smirked. Still fighting off power-hungry executives, still keeping my company from being torn apart, still making questionable coffee choices at 2 in the morning. Some things never change. Emma hummed, sipping her wine. And the foundation? His expression shifted into something softer. Thriving. We've expanded 3 of our programs internationally. Your legal reforms help streamline the entire process. Emma felt a flicker of pride, but she kept her voice even. Glad to hear I wasn't entirely replaceable. Alexander chuckled, tilting his head. Not even close. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city buzzing around them, alive with possibility. Then, casually, as if he hadn't been waiting months to ask, he said, "So, is this where you tell me if I still have a chance?" Emma exhaled, setting her glass down. Alex. He held up a hand. Before you answer, no pressure. No expectations. I just want to know where your head is at. And for once, she actually knew the answer. When I left, I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't just reacting to everything happening around me, she admitted. That I was capable of making choices for myself, for my own future. Alexander nodded, listening intently. I've spent the last few months doing exactly that, she continued. And for the first time, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground, not because I'm with someone, not because I'm running from something, but because I built it for myself. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Alexander's lips. And do you like what you built? Emma smiled back. I do. Alexander leaned back in his chair, exhaling as if he had been holding his breath. Then I'd say it was all worth it. She tilted her head. Even the part where you nearly lost everything? He chuckled. Especially that part. Emma studied him, the man who had given her a chance when she was at her lowest, the man who had never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And maybe that was the answer she had been searching for all along. She reached for her glass again, raising it slightly. To new beginnings. Alexander clinked his glass against hers, his gray eyes glinting with something unreadable yet undeniably warm. To whatever comes next, he corrected. And as they sat there, no labels, no expectations, just 2 people who had fought their way back from the brink, Emma realized that maybe she didn't need a grand ending. Maybe this space between past and future, between certainty and possibility, was enough. For now. And maybe, for the first time in her life, that was more than enough. When is the end? Emma's story doesn't end with a dramatic declaration or a neatly wrapped romance, it ends with possibility. With her standing on her own, with a future that is open and unwritten. It's not about choosing a man or a career, it's about choosing herself. She and Alexander share a moment, an understanding, but the future is left for them to define on their own terms, just like life itself. It's an open-ended conclusion, but a satisfying one. A story about strength, reinvention, and learning that sometimes, not knowing exactly what comes next is the best kind of ending. Would you like me to refine or adjust anything? Thank you for staying with me through this story. Life is unpredictable, full of challenges and unexpected turns, but sometimes, the hardest moments lead to the greatest transformations. What do you think? Should Emma have taken a different path? Would you have made the same choices in her place? Let me know in the comments. And of course, if there were any mistakes or things that could have been done better, I sincerely apologize. Your feedback helps improve the stories we share, so feel free to point out anything I missed. Until next time, stay strong, keep moving forward, and remember, every ending is just the beginning of something new.